He walked up to the counter, ready to board his first-class seat on a luxury flight, but the airline staff refused to let him on. He didn't understand why at first. Was it a mistake? No, it was something far worse. A quiet, seething discrimination that no one had the courage to speak out about. In the moments that followed, the CEO of one of the most successful companies in the world would experience something he never thought possible, the full brunt of racial bias in the most unexpected plot. How far would he go to make sure this never happens again? Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening. Your support means everything. As Marcus Reynolds had it all. A self-made millionaire by the age of 30, he was the CEO of a cutting-edge tech company that had reshaped the way people interacted with technology. His rise from a small, underfunded startup to a global powerhouse wasn't just a testament to his intelligence, but his grit. A young black man, he'd spent years overcoming obstacles, fighting stereotypes, and building a reputation that would be hard for anyone to break. Marcus had always kept his personal life close to the vest, focusing instead on the work that defined him. He had learned early on that his presence in a boardroom, his voice in a meeting, and his ambition in a male-dominated industry would be scrutinized more than most. He didn't mind. After all, what didn't kill him only made him stronger. He was used to being the only person of color in spaces filled with the most elite, the most powerful. He had to be, to survive. Today, though, was supposed to be different. He'd just secured a major partnership for his company, and the celebration was well overdue. The jet, the first-class seat, all part of the reward for his hard work. He couldn't wait to escape the high-strung meetings and relentless deadlines. This flight was supposed to be a moment of peace, of comfort, a much-needed escape before diving into another round of high-stakes business. As he walked through the airport terminal, he felt a familiar sense of pride. Not arrogance, but pride. This wasn't just about him, it was about every person who'd ever been told that they didn't belong. Every person who'd had their worth questioned, their potential underestimated, just because of their skin color. He had risen above it all. But as he approached the first-class counter, something felt off. The attendant, a young woman with an eager smile, looked up at him with an expression that didn't quite match the warm greeting she'd given the passenger before him. "Sir, may I see your ticket?" she asked, but there was a hesitation in her voice. Marcus handed her his ticket, his mind momentarily distracted by the thought of the deal he had just closed. But then, her eyes scanned the ticket again, more closely this time. A furrow creased her brow. She looked at the boarding pass, then back at him. "I'm sorry, sir. There's been an issue. You're not allowed to board in first class," she said, her voice flat, devoid of any real empathy. For a moment, Marcus thought he had misheard. He was a frequent flyer with this airline, always seated in first class, never a problem. He looked around, half expecting someone to walk up and explain that this was just a mistake, a simple mix-up. But no one came. The words lingered in the air between them. "Excuse me," he asked, a chill starting to spread through his chest. "I've got a first-class seat. Are you sure you're looking at the right ticket?" Her eyes darted to the computer screen, then quickly back to him, but the discomfort was clear. "Yes, sir. Unfortunately, there seems to be some confusion." Marcus tried to remain calm, but it didn't feel like confusion. It felt like something deeper. He tried to tell himself it wasn't personal, that maybe the system was down, but in the pit of his stomach, he felt the familiar sting, the one he had learned to ignore for years. It was the same sting he'd felt every time he had been doubted, overlooked, or questioned. "Can I speak to someone in charge?" he asked, his voice now steady but cold. The attendant hesitated but nodded, signaling to another staff member. The tension was thick, but Marcus wasn't going to let it go. He had worked too hard to be treated this way. But as he stood there, waiting for the manager to come over, he couldn't shake the feeling that the problem wasn't a mix-up in the system, it was something far worse. The only thing that was being sorted out was the space they were making for him, the one where he didn't belong. Asterisk. The manager returned a moment later, followed by a woman in a sharply tailored suit. Her heels clicked against the floor, announcing her presence before she even spoke. She looked at Marcus with a calculated smile, the kind that seemed practiced, like she had seen it all before. "I'm the supervisor," she said, her voice smooth. "I understand there's a misunderstanding. Let's sort this out quickly." But Marcus wasn't interested in being polite anymore. He was done with the pretense. "You don't understand anything," he said, his voice cutting through the air, making everyone around him flinch. "You see me standing here, you see my ticket, but you can't seem to understand that I've earned this seat just like anyone else." The supervisor blinked, her smile faltering for the first time. She glanced over at the manager, who had stepped back, clearly uncomfortable. "This isn't about a seat, is it?" Marcus continued, the anger rising in his chest. "It's about who you think deserves to sit in first class, who you think belongs here, and who doesn't. I'm tired of being treated like I'm invisible. I've built an empire from the ground up, and I've fought for every single inch of my success. And yet, here I am, being denied a seat because you think I don't belong." The words hit like a slap. But the supervisor quickly regained her composure, her face now a mask of indifference. "We're simply following policy," she said, her tone dismissive. "There's nothing personal about it. It's just procedure." Marcus shook his head, disbelief flashing in his eyes. "Don't tell me it's policy," he snapped. "I know what this is. This is about you making assumptions about who I am, about what I deserve. And it's not just me, is it? It's every person who has ever walked into a room, into a plane, into a space, and been looked at like they don't belong. It's about the way we're treated as less than, simply because of the color of our skin." The supervisor took a step back, her eyes narrowing slightly. But Marcus wasn't finished. Not yet. He could feel the tension building inside him, a storm of frustration and righteous anger ready to break free. "I could sit here and argue all day," he said, his voice low but seething, "but I'm done. I'm done letting you push me around. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I could do to this airline? Because I'm not just some angry passenger with a complaint. I'm the CEO of a company that brings in millions. I'm a person of power. And I'm not going to let this slide." The words hung in there like a challenge, a declaration. The supervisor's face went pale. She was no longer looking at him as just another customer. She was looking at someone who could make her life much more difficult than she ever wanted to imagine. "Now, here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, each word deliberate. "You're going to find me my seat, and I'm going to fly in the seat I paid for. But when this flight lands, I'm going to make sure everyone knows what happened here today. I'm going to make sure that your airline is held accountable for every person you've ever discriminated against. Because this isn't just my fight anymore. This is everyone's fight." For a moment, silence swallowed the terminal. The tension in the air was thick, oppressive. The supervisor's mouth opened and closed as if searching for the right words, but none came. Then, the security guard, who had been standing in the background, approached. He stood between Marcus and the supervisor, his face unreadable. "Sir," he said, his voice calm but firm, "there's no need for this to escalate further. If you would just come with me, we'll sort this out." Marcus didn't flinch. He locked eyes with the guard, and yielding, "No," he said sharply, "I'm not going anywhere until I get the respect I deserve." Just as the situation seemed on the verge of exploding, the crowd's whispers reached a fever pitch. More people were gathering, all of them watching, waiting to see how this would unfold. The air crackled with tension. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, some supportive, some judgmental, but all of them were witnessing this moment of confrontation. And that's when the supervisor's phone rang. She picked it up with shaking hands, speaking in hushed tones to whoever was on the other end. Her eyes flicked between Marcus and the manager, who had now stepped forward, his expression tight. He was trying to decide whether he should intervene or just let the situation play out. After a moment, the supervisor hung up, her face pale. "The flight is full," she said, her voice no longer confident. "There's nothing we can do about the seating." Marcus looked at her, his frustration growing. He had heard enough. But before he could say another word, the supervisor finally spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spoken to corporate. I've been informed that they'll be making an exception this time. You can board, Mr. Reynolds. But this situation won't go unnoticed. We'll be addressing this matter." Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile that said, "I told you so. I'm not here for your exceptions," Marcus said, his voice now calm, measured. "I'm here because you have a problem. A systemic problem. And until that problem is fixed, you'll never see the last of me, or anyone else who's ever been treated like they don't belong." As he turned to walk towards the gate, Marcus knew this wasn't over. This wasn't just a fight for a seat. This was a fight to be seen, to be heard, and to demand that everyone, no matter their background, was treated with the respect they deserved. And this was just the beginning. The plane finally took off, and Marcus sank into his seat. The seat he had paid for, the seat he had earned. It wasn't the first-class luxury he had envisioned, but it was a small victory in a battle that was far from over. He gazed out the window, lost in thought, as the city below faded into the distance. His mind raced through the events that had just unfolded, the injustice of it all, and the humiliation he had endured. But something was different now. He was no longer just a CEO, a businessman climbing the corporate ladder. Marcus had become a symbol of something far greater, a symbol of defiance in the face of systemic racism. He had stood his ground, refused to be silenced, and in doing so, had forced an entire airline to rethink their treatment of customers. By the time the plane landed, Marcus had made a decision. The entire incident, the arrogance of the staff, and the way he had been treated wasn't just an isolated event. It was a reflection of the larger issue that plagued not only this airline but so many industries and systems that operated under the false pretense of equality. The next morning, Marcus contacted his legal team. He wasn't going to let this go. A few phone calls, a few well-placed emails, and before long, news of the incident spread across the media. It went viral. People rallied around Marcus, sharing their own experiences with discrimination, with the silent biases that had plagued them for years. The story of the black CEO denied a seat on a flight was a story that resonated with many, especially those who had faced the same struggles. Within a week, Marcus had received a formal apology from the airline's corporate headquarters. But that wasn't enough. Marcus demanded more than just a written apology. He demanded a change in policy, a commitment to diversity and inclusion training for all employees, and a public acknowledgement of the airline's failure to uphold basic standards of respect and fairness. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had ever been treated less than because of the color of their skin. He was fighting for every person who had been told, in one way or another, that they didn't belong. The company, shaken by the public backlash, agreed to make significant changes. The CEO of the airline personally reached out to Marcus, expressing regret for the incident. They promised to implement new systems to ensure that their first-class seats would no longer be subject to such biases. But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. Change, real change, took time and it required constant vigilance, but the impact of his stand was undeniable. A shift had begun. The story was talked about in boardrooms, on social media, and in every corner of the country. Conversations about race, about privilege, and about systemic inequality started happening more frequently, more openly. People were talking, and for the first time in a long time, they weren't just talking about it, they were doing something about it. Marcus received countless messages of support from individuals and organizations who had been inspired by his courage. But the most meaningful message came from a young black woman, a college student, who wrote to him, "I never thought I could make a difference. But after hearing your story, I realized that I have a voice I can stand up to." That, for Marcus, was the true victory. It wasn't just about the seat on the plane, or even the public apology. It was about the ripple effect his actions had sparked, about the future he had helped create for others who would no longer have to silently accept the injustice they faced. And so, as Marcus stood at the front of his company's headquarters, preparing for the next round of meetings, he knew this fight was far from over. But he was no longer just a man fighting for his own seat on an airplane. He was leading a movement toward fairness, respect, and equality. In the end, he didn't just win a seat. He won the fight for dignity, for justice, and for the future. And as he walked into the next meeting, he held his head high, not just as a CEO, but as a man who had truly changed the world.